Hello, Math Wizards! Welcome to a new lesson episode of Just Math PH. So, for today's lesson, we will be learning about solutions to quadratic equations using Vedic method. This method is an application of factoring. However, before we proceed to that lesson, let's have first a review of our lesson last time. So, the lesson that we had last time was all about solutions to quadratic equations using extracting square roots. So as a review, extracting square roots is only applicable to quadratic equations where there is no linear term. Again, extracting square roots is only applicable if the linear term or bx is not around, because we could just easily transfer the constant to the right side of our equation and then do some manipulations like extracting square roots on both sides, and then we can have directly the roots. So let's have an example. 2x squared minus 24 is equal to 0. So this quadratic equation is an example of a quadratic equation where the linear term bx is not given or it's not around. We only have the quadratic term and the constant term. So in this case, to find the roots of this quadratic equation, we have to solve it by using the extracting square roots. So we will transfer or separate the quadratic term with the constant term by transferring negative 24 to the right side of our equation. So it becomes 2x squared equals positive 24. Since transferring this to the other side, we'll have to change its sign. Now notice that the value of our a in the quadratic term is not 1, it is 2. So we have to make it 1 by dividing the quadratic term with the same value of our a, which is 2. Okay, so whatever is the number here on top, divide it with the same number below. Since we have to follow the rules in equality, then we have also to divide this side by 2. Now, 2 divided by 2, that is 1 copy x squared equals 12. Now, we know that if we have a coefficient 1 beside our variable, we could just write it invisible. Okay, we could write it in an invisible form. So what I will do, I will just erase this one since it's already understood that there is a coefficient 1 here. So the lowest part is already x squared equals 12. We can now apply extracting square root. So write the squared symbol. Okay, write the squared symbol on both sides of our equation. Do not forget the plus and the minus square root of 12. No. And then we will solve this. So we know that there is an invisible 2 here. We could just remove the radical symbol or the square root symbol and the exponent inside. So we are left with x. Now, since the number inside the square root is not a perfect number, we have to factor it in such a way that the first number is a perfect number paired with a non-perfect number. So that is 4 times 3. Now we know 4 can be written as 2 squared in the exponent form. So write times 3. So 2 squared is 4. times c. So 4 times c, that is 12. Okay? Now, since 2 has an exponent of 2, we can extract it, meaning we can place it outside in such a way that it will now be the square root. So that is x is equal to positive and negative. So the square root of 2 squared, it becomes 2, or positive 2, negative 2. And since we are left with 3 inside, we have to copy still the radical symbol and then put 3 inside. So our roots are the following: positive 2 square root of 3 and negative 2 square root of 3. So how do we find solutions to quadratic equations if the quadratic equation that you have has a linear term, or it has a linear term given? Now, this quadratic equation can be solved using Vedic method, which is an application of factoring. However, we have to consider if the quadratic equation given to us is factorable. So I will show you a technique on how to determine if a quadratic equation is factorable for us to solve it using the Vedic method. Okay, so we have here an example: y squared minus 6y plus 5 equals 0. So how do we know if this quadratic equation is factorable? So first, let's identify the value of a, b, and c. Okay, so remember that a can be found on the quadratic term, b can be found on the linear term, and c can be found in the constant term. So a is equivalent to 1 since we know that there is an invisible 1 beside y squared, so that is 1. And b is equivalent to negative 6. Do not forget the sign. So it's negative 6. And c is equivalent to positive 5. Okay? So since we already identified our a, b, and c, what we will do is we will multiply our a and our c, which is 1 times 5. So multiply it. 1 times 5 is equivalent to 5. Okay? After multiplying it, I want you to think of two numbers. If we add these two numbers, it has to result to our b, which is negative 6. And if we multiply these two numbers, the result would be 5. Again, find two numbers which, if we multiply them, it will result to positive 5. But if we have to add them, the result will be negative 6. So basically, the two numbers that we want to find are negative 5 and negative 1. Why? Because negative 5 times negative 1 is positive 5. But negative 5 plus negative 1 is equivalent to negative 6. Since adding like signs, we'll have to add the numbers and then copy their common sign. But if we have to multiply like signed numbers, it will always be positive. So since we found two numbers which adds up to negative 6, and when we multiply this 5, we had find them. Therefore, y squared minus 6y plus 5 equals 0 is factorable. Okay, so it's factorable. For the next example of determining whether a quadratic equation is factorable, we have here 2x squared minus 6x equals 0, where our quadratic term is 2x squared and our linear term is negative 6x. So we don't have the constant term here, but it's not a problem. Now we can still find or determine if this quadratic equation is factorable. So first, let's determine the values of a, okay, our a, b, and c. So our a is positive 2, our b is negative 6. Since our c is not given, meaning our c is 0. So let's multiply our a and our c. So multiplying it, that is 2 times 0 is 0. Okay, next. Now, we have to find two numbers which adds up to negative 6 again. And if multiplied, it will be 0. So obviously, the two numbers that we want to find are 0 plus negative 6, right? Since 0 times negative 6 is 0, and 0 plus negative 6 is negative 6. So since the two numbers exist, or we can find two numbers that adds up to negative 6 and when multiply is 0, therefore 2x squared minus 6x is factorable. So it's factorable. Now let's proceed to the next example. X squared plus 5x plus 3 equals 0. So is this quadratic equation factorable or not? So let's find out. Let's determine first our A, B, and C. So our A is obviously 1, our B is 5, and our C is 3. So multiply A and C, so that is 1 times 3, that is positive 3. And let's have to find two numbers that adds up to our B, which is 5. And when multiplied, it will be 3. So can you think of two numbers where if we will multiply them, it will be 3, but if we add them, it will be 5? Can you think? Is there numbers that exist in such a way that multiplying it will be 3 and adding them would be 5? Now, the factors of 3 are 1 and 3 only, or negative 1 and negative 3. But if we add them, it will never result to 5. So since we cannot find two numbers that adds up to 5 and when multiplied is 3, therefore, since these two numbers do not exist, okay, do not exist, we cannot find them. Since these two numbers do not exist, therefore, x squared plus 5x plus 3 is not factorable. So since we already know how to determine if quadratic equations are factorable or not, then we can know whether we can solve the quadratic equation using Vedic method. So again, Vedic method in solving quadratic equations is only applicable for factorable quadratic equations. So let's try to have an example where we will solve equations using Vedic method. So let's use the same example we had earlier. Y squared minus 6y plus 5 equals 0. So since we already know that this quadratic equation is factorable, then we can apply Vedic method. Okay, so how do we solve this using Vedic method? Okay, so first, again, identify our A, B, and C. That's the first step. A, B, and C. So our A again is 1, our B is negative 6, and our C is positive 5. Afterwards, multiply our A and C. So 1 times 5 is 5. After multiplying A and C, do the same thing. Find two numbers that adds up to negative 6, which is our B here, negative 6. And if we multiply them, the result will be 5. So since we already know that the two numbers are negative 5 and negative 1. So again, negative 5 times negative 1 is 5. And negative 5 plus negative 1 is negative 6. So the next step is we have to divide these two numbers that we have here by our A. Okay, again, divide these two numbers here, okay, this one and this, by our A. So our A is 1. Okay, our A here is 1. No. So divided by 1, our A, divided by 1. Now, negative 5 divided by 1 is still, it's obviously negative 5. And then negative 1 divided by 1 is still negative 1. Now, the next step is to flip their signs. So, flip or change. Flip or change their signs. So, since this is negative 5, it becomes positive 5. And since this is negative 1, this becomes positive 1. So, since we already changed your sign, therefore the roots are, or the solutions are 5 and positive 1. Now, let's try if x squared minus 9 equals 0 can be solved using Vedic method. So here we don't have the linear term, but let's try if we can solve this using Vedic method. So let's first determine our A. So our A is 1. Our B is not given, so it's 0. Our C is negative 9, or our constant is negative 9. So let's multiply A and C. So 1 times negative 9 is negative 9. And then we have to find two numbers again that when multiplied, it will be negative 9. But if we add these two numbers, the result is our B, which is 0. Okay? Now, let's find these two numbers. The two numbers are obviously negative 3 and positive 3, because negative 3 times positive 3, negative 3 times positive 3 is negative 9. Since multiplying unlike signs, this one is negative and this one is positive, it will have a negative product. So negative 3 times positive 3, the result is negative 9. But if we add them, the result is 0. Since adding unlike signs, we have to subtract them, and 3 minus 3 is 0. Now, since we found two numbers that adds up to 0 and we multiply this negative 9, it means that x squared minus 9 equals 0 is factorable. So we can apply the Vedic method. So let's continue. Now, we have to divide the two numbers by our a. So our a is still 1. So divide it by 1 by 1. So that is negative 3 and positive 3. So next thing is we have to change their signs. So flip or change their signs. So obviously changing it, it becomes negative 3 becomes positive 3, and positive 3 becomes negative 3. So the change numbers or the change sign numbers are actually the roots or our solution. Okay, solutions. So therefore, the roots or our solutions are positive 3 and negative 3. The next example that we have here is 2x squared minus 3x equals negative 1. So notice that this quadratic equation is not written in standard form, so we cannot identify easily the a, b, and c. So we have to first write it in the standard form. So remember that the right side of our equation must be 0, so we have to transfer negative 1 to the left side of our equation. So that becomes 2x squared minus 3x. So transfer negative 1 to the right side, left side. So that is positive 1 equals 0. So always remember to write in the standard form. Now let's identify our A. Our A is 2. Our B is negative 3. And our C is positive 1. So let's do the same thing. Multiply A and C. So A and C is 2 times 1 is positive 2. And then find two numbers that would multiply these two. And if we add them, the result is our B, which is negative 3. So what do you think are the two numbers? So these two numbers are negative 2 and negative 1. Because negative 2 times negative 1 is positive 2, since multiplying like sign must have a positive result. So that is positive 2. And adding like signs, you have to add the numbers and then copy the common sign. So negative 2 plus negative 1, that is negative 3, since negative is their common sign. Now, after finding the two numbers, we have to divide these two numbers by our A. Now, our A is 2. So let's divide it by 2. Okay. After dividing it, okay, the results are negative 2 divided by 2. The answer is negative 1. And then negative 1 divided by 2, that is negative 1/2. That's a fraction. So flip their signs. Okay, flip their signs. So that is positive 1 and then positive 1/2. Therefore, our roots are 1 and positive 1/2.